Madad, from wherever you have joined us today. Thank you for your interest and support for what the series of videos that the International Conciliation and Arbitration Board broadcasts on Ismaili TV during Mediation Awareness Week. For this series, we have two main objectives. The first is to provide the Jamaat with an overview of the services that are provided by the Conciliation and Arbitration Boards, affectionately known as CABs, across 20 jurisdictions around the world. And these services are available to myriads of murids in the Jamaat throughout the world, so that they can deal and you can deal with conflicts as they arise, and hopefully as soon as they arise, so they don't fester and become intransigent over the period of time. Conflict is extremely costly. It's costly on the family's treasure, financially. It's also emotionally costly. And so it's really important that those be dealt with as soon as possible. The CAB system is designed to help murids deal with matrimonial matters, family matters, commercial matters, discreetly and confidentially within the ethics of our faith, following the laws of the lands in which we live. Our second objective is to provide insights and ideas that focus on dispute prevention. And it is in that context that I'm going to have my conversation with two exceptional individuals today, so that you have an idea around how you can, some of the ideas you can think about to protect yourselves and to limit risk in the future. I'm really pleased to have with me Shainul Qasim. Shainul is a corporate commercial lawyer and a founder of Fortune Law. Her firm acts as for founders and entrepreneurs, so she has that as a special skill set, and to help them start up. And so that's why she's particularly well qualified to speak about some of the things that you need to think about during startup phase. And she's also an accredited commercial mediator. She teaches law for entrepreneurs on the Executive MBA program at Imperial College London. I am personally most proud to call her a colleague on ICAB. We've served together for the past 8 years on ICAB, and prior to her appointment on ICAB, she served as a member of NCAB UK for 6 years. She's a regular contributor in the media in the UK, focusing on her two passions, law and entrepreneurship. I think she will resonate with many of you in the Jamaat. I'm also very pleased to introduce Rahim Molu. Rahim is a partner in the law firm of Gibson, Dunn Croucher, and is a global co-chair of the firm's international arbitration practice. He has been recognized as a leader and expert in resolving international disputes. Most recently, the Who's Who Legal recognizes Rahim as one of the most skilled advocates of his generation. And of course, as a Jamaat, we're just so proud of all the people that we have in the Jamaat, the talent in the Jamaat. Rahim is an adjunct faculty at the Columbia Law School, and he regularly lectures and writes on issues with respect to international disputes and international law. He is invited to lecture at a number of schools, including Yale, Harvard, Columbia, NYU, and the University of Cambridge. He has also been a colleague for the last 8 years, and I am most proud of the contribution and the talent that these two exceptional murids bring to the system. And for that reason, I'm really pleased to have a conversation with them today. So I'm going to start with you, Shainul. We talk about dispute resolution, but an important part about how we move forward is to look at risk mitigation and preventing disputes. So from your experience as a solicitor working in this area, as well as your experience as a mediator and working in the CAP system, what are some of the things that you think Jamaati members should be reflecting on as they look to engage and start businesses or continue on with businesses as as they move forward in their lives?
I think that's a great question. And I think it's important to understand that, even as a corporate commercial solicitor, almost half of my work involves dealing with shareholder disputes and business disputes and contractual disputes. So it is the other side of the coin, as it were. And so there's two important things I think that people who are entering into a business relationship should really consider. And the two things are that often the process of preparing the contract is as important as the contract itself. So, actually running through what it is that each party expects of the other, who is going to do what kind of risks are actually going to impact that business venture, and what will the parties do if things go wrong, and preparing for that. So, that conversation piece is really, really critical in actually helping to not only prevent the dispute arising, but in order to allow the parties agency in how they're going to deal with that. Because when we get into a dispute, it's not often that the parties want an actual legal remedy, injunctive relief or damages. They actually want a commercial solution to their commercial problem. So that's the starting point, is actually invest the time in making sure that you follow through a process in order to get to that document that you're going to sign at the end of it. And also to, a party starting out in business, it may be the first time that they're doing this. So it may be that they don't really understand the process or the importance of the contract, but it's not the first time it's ever been done. So there is a well-trodden path in terms of contracts. We're not sort of reinventing the wheel. There are, multiple precedents in place that should mean that the process itself isn't as daunting as parties might think. So I think that's really important, is to make sure that people prepare, know that there is a path to be walked down, and actually they're far more in control of the actual contractual terms and what each party is going to do, as well as resolving a dispute if it were to occur.
So I think you're focusing that on sort of communication as an important part. And I'm in my mind, I'm thinking the same should apply for when you're actually entering into a matrimonial matter, into any other kind of joint venture of a nature, is being able to say, let's clarify so that we are on the same page as we engage and walk down that particular pathway.
Absolutely. I mean, communication is key in commercial contracts, commercial disputes, and then also family agreements and family conflict when it arises. And so, clarity of expectation is really important between the parties. Have we explained what it is that we need, or what it is that we're going to deliver ourselves, or what we're going to commit to? Or are we expecting the other party to engage in a form of mind reading and holding themselves to standards that we haven't actually communicated effectively ourselves? And just to understand and accept that not everything is always going to go according to plan. And so that's families and businesses. And where there's no legal obligation sometimes, I mean, some contracts have to be put into writing, and some contracts you don't necessarily have to put them into writing, especially with family relationships. But where there's no legal obligation, there's often a commercial or moral imperative to have those conversations at the outset.
Rahim, from your experience, what do you think are the barriers to people, putting those things into play? What what stops people from doing what when Shino says seems like very logical steps to take?
No, it's a good question, and for a long time we've been talking about those issues. What are the barriers to entering into contracts? Why don't people enter into contracts if it can ultimately help them resolve disputes? And I think there's a couple of key things, none of which will probably come as a surprise to the Jamaat. But the first is trust, right? I think a lot of people think to themselves, I trust my colleague, my brother, my sister, my friend. And so I don't need to enter into a contract because I know that they're not going to do me wrong and I'm not going to do them wrong. So there's an element of trust, which is a great starting point, but they feel like they don't need a contract because there is that trust. But I think with respect to that aspect of trust, it's not. And let me just add one more thing about that. And I think the other side of it is they say, well, look, if I ask for a contract, it makes it look like I don't trust that person, right? So, if I'm asking to memorialize, to put into writing what it is that we're agreeing to, they will feel like, well, what? Don't you trust me? And in that sense, it's not really. A question of do you or do you not trust the other person. In fact, what I would say is that writing down your contract helps keep the trust that you have in the relationship, because what it does is it makes sure that you're all on the same page. So coming back to what Shaima was saying earlier, it's just about communication. It's making sure you're literally on the same page, and there isn't a miscommunication, that your understanding of the deal is the same as the other person's understanding of the deal. When you start writing things down, things come to your mind that you don't maybe think about until you start writing it down. Then you say, oh, but what about this? If we're going to write it down, shouldn't we also think about this other thing? And even later on, in a year from now or 2 years from now, when a dispute or some disagreement might arise, memories fade, right? And it's much easier if you have a reference point to be able to go back and say, I know we talked about this. What did we agree? And if you have a document that reflects your understanding at the time, then both parties can go back and say, oh, yes, I remember, this is what we agreed, and you can move on. Whereas if you don't have that piece of writing, it can actually erode trust. It can undermine the trust that you started with, and that is so important and foundational for long-term successful relationships. So I think trust is, ironically, a barrier to entering into these contracts, but in fact, contracts can help you maintain the trust that is so critical to those long-term relationships. And sorry, go ahead, Zoe. No, I was just going to say the
Go ahead.
second sort of thing that I think is a barrier is cost, right? I think people think, and it's a combination of the two. They say, I trust this person, I don't need a contract. And by the way, it costs a lot of money to hire a lawyer. Lawyers are expensive. And so, do I really need to incur that cost, especially when I trust the other person? So the trust point I've dealt with, but cost, and it's worth the cost is I guess the short answer from my perspective. And the reason for that is in part, again, I'll come back to what Shaimal said. I often do, because she often says things that are very smart, where she said, there are precedents. There are things that there are. This is well trodden ground. You're not the first one putting together a contract, and it may not be as expensive or time consuming as you think to put in place those contracts. And in the long term, it's well worth it, because the cost of a dispute, both emotionally, financially, and from a time perspective, are far more taxing than the relatively small cost to make sure you're able to put your agreement and your understanding in writing up front. So it's worth the cost, and it doesn't cost probably nearly as much from a time or monetary perspective as you think it does.
And sort of don't be penny wise and pound foolish in that context. But sometimes people put things in writing, and I certainly find that happens in many of my areas of practice. As people, put down a contract, and then it sits in the bottom drawer of somebody's desk. What would be your advice around, you know, how should that contract then be used and modified and changed along the way? Shino, do you have any insights from your experience?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, sometimes those are the best contracts, the ones that are well drafted, everyone's gone through a proper process, and then you do put them away and you don't look at them. And the reason you don't necessarily look at them is not because things haven't changed or the relationship hasn't grown, it's because there is communication between the parties where they are varying their contract through negotiation. and discussion and dialogue. And they don't necessarily have to go back and do a formal amendment to their contract. Those amendments are happening organically through emails, telephone calls, and so on. So contracts should actually allow you to grow within that commercial relationship. And so that's also part of the process, really, and if it's a long-term contract, the likelihood of that happening is going to be greater. So, does that contract allow you room to grow? Because that's quite important. So, as much as we need certainty, we also need a degree of flexibility within that contract. But the most critical thing is that parties understand what it is they said they were going to do at the beginning, and they also understand how they're going to be able to develop and grow that, whether it's a joint venture or something else going forward. And part of that really is processes built into the contract that allow you to communicate or escalate situations internally. So we're not at dispute stage, we're not involved in aggressive conduct or hostile behavior. We're actually, there is an issue and a problem. Have we built something into our document that allows two people from our organization, one party from each side, to come along and talk to each other about the fact that there is a problem, and how are we going to deal with that problem internally? It could be a deliverables issue. There are lots of things that cause conflict in commercial disputes, and they're not necessarily just about the parties themselves. There are sort of geopolitical issues at play, inflation, cost of supplies. Things are happening to one party or another, which is sometimes outside of their control. But you do want to come together and have the opportunity to vary your contract so it still works for both parties. So I think it's really important that you have a starting point, but you also have a mechanism for communicating and managing the contractual relationship, either by conduct or correspondence or by a formal amendment to your contract. But you've got to start somewhere.
Indeed. But you also need to make sure you're documenting that evolution along the way. So you're not dealing with a contract in 1967 and nothing else until until you're dealing with it in 2023. Indeed. Rahim, in the context of family, commercial matters, and so on, there are often occasions where the contract is between the two or three principal players, but lots of people have an impact or are impacted by how the business works together. And what would be your advice around making sure that those things are taken into account?
No, it's a very good question. I think it's along the lines of what we've been discussing, both at the outset when you're negotiating the contract. I think it's important that key stakeholders understand what it is that the agreement is that's being entered into. Everybody's on the same page, not just those that are signing the contract, but those that are impacted by it. And then, I think coming back to the point that the two of you were discussing earlier, it is about communication over the life of the contract, right? As principles change, right? The if it's a family business, for example, that's passed on to the next generation, it's important that those people, before they take the helm, understand the relationships, are familiar with the fact that there are contracts. If there are amendments, coming back to the point you were discussing, that they be documented so that, one side is not saying, oh, this is what the contract says, and the other side says, yeah, but that's not the way we've been doing it, right? And so, to make sure, as you were both saying, that the contract continues to evolve and reflect the reality of the business relationship between the two parties, and not just the principals, but others that are involved in that relationship. So I think a key piece of it comes back to something I think, Zuli, you said at the outset, communication, right? It's important. The contract is, and as Shimel said, the starting point for that communication, right? It's the initial document. It gives you a framework for the relationship, and things will continue to evolve. They will continue to change. And it's important that the document continues to evolve in the same way, involving all key stakeholders in those discussions.
We've been talking this week about mediation awareness, and of course showing the fact that despite our best efforts, there are occasions when there are conflicts that need to be resolved, and they can't be resolved within the internal processes of the contract or whatever those initiatives. That they've now gotten to the point where there's either a relationship that needs to be severed, or we're moving on into a different process. Mediation obviously is the first place for work to happen. Uh, but occasionally mediation does not work, and there are obviously the litigation options that are available. Rahim, I want to just zero in on your experience as an arbitrator, and work that you have done within that particular context. What are some of the alternatives that the Jamaat can use for when they really do need to be looking at ways of resolving a dispute that has arisen?
So, as you said, rightly, Zili, mediation is, in our view, the best approach because it's not about winners and losers, right? It is about trying to find a way forward that can take into account what both sides are looking to achieve. So, some way forward that is uh, that achieves everybody's objectives. And mediation really is the only path to really truly achieve that. But if sometimes mediation doesn't work and there's a fundamental disagreement between the parties, that you need a third party to come in and advise or decide what the right position is. And you know, court proceedings are expensive, they're public, they can be extremely um, time consuming, emotionally draining, and costly for parties. Arbitration is a better alternative. It is, it has its own uh, issues, I'll say, but it is generally confidential, which is helpful, especially when there's a dispute between members that they don't want publicized amongst a broader group of people. Um, it is usually more efficient. So, for example, one of the most usually costly and time-consuming and aggravating parts of a dispute in court is discovery, right? Deposition. You're deposing the other side. You're aggressively sort of asking for documents and communications, and that is oftentimes the most time-consuming and aggravating part of a dispute. And arbitration is much more efficient about that. So there are no depositions, generally speaking, and there isn't extensive and expensive discovery in the way you normally have in litigation. Um, and so, partly for that reason, we are piloting in the CAB system the arbitration of commercial disputes in Canada and the United States, where mediations are unsuccessful, um, because it offers that alternative to litigation that is confidential, more cost effective, more efficient, and less aggravating. And an important part for us is it offers off ramps too. There are opportunities where you can say, you know what, maybe now is a good time to re-engage in a mediation or settlement discussions. Um, so I think that's a good alternative, though not as good as mediation to litigation.
Indeed, and I think for in most cases the importance of arbitration, if it is going to be as part arbitration, it's always within the context of the legal system's ability to enforce, right? And that's where the problems really happen. Is in some places it's really not possible to have that enforced with the same level of vigor as you would expect, and so you're still dependent on someone else's system in play, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there are certain types of disputes that cannot be submitted to arbitration. We've, as a CAB system, looked at this in different parts of the world, as you both know. And so there are certain types of disputes that cannot be submitted to arbitration because the courts, have or the jurisdiction has said, this is an issue that we reserve for the courts to decide. So in many jurisdictions, matrimonial type issues, child custody type issues fall within those types of categories where arbitration simply cannot, or an arbitration award would not be recognized by the jurisdiction. So that is right. So again, in those circumstances, it's either mediation where the parties are coming together and trying to do the best they can to meet each other's needs, or litigation where you're leaving the decision up to a third party who you don't know who it's going to be, right? And that is a lot of risk. There's a lot of risk associated with that.
Shainu, from your experience, is there anything that you think would be an important kernel for folks to keep in mind as they look at the possibility of, the contract? We've given them all of the information about how it's important that they do that, and then it simply doesn't work. What are some of the other issues that we've not discussed today that you think they should keep in mind?
I think it's critical to keep a commercial mindset, because I think it's really important if you're going into a business venture or a commercial relationship, the starting point is, do I want this to work? And if I want this to work, what am I going to invest into this process in terms of time, resources, and your own commitment to that relationship? And then to not have an expectation that everything's going to run smoothly and it's going to be perfect along the way, because life just isn't like that. So it's important that when things do go wrong, number one, have I thought that through? And have I put something in place so that I actually have a plan B, or I have a way of trying to find a solution to this specific problem? And then also to keep a commercial mindset at that stage, not just as you enter into that relationship, but throughout. It's very easy sometimes, because cost and lack of clarity regarding expectation aren't the only things that are happening. There's a lot of emotional response to when a dispute arises. And it's very easy to, number one, hold people to your own standards, and you may not have communicated those in any event, but to expect people to behave in the same way that you would behave. And if they don't do that, well, then they're completely unreasonable. And so the temptation then is to draw very clear boundaries around yourself and your expectations, and not necessarily enter into dialogue that is actually going to present you with the best solution for you, your business, and your own well-being. So I think if you find yourself in a dispute, to keep a commercial mindset and to make sure that you're trying to do the best you can in that situation, as much as you did in the situations that brought you to that particular place.
Thank you. That's very important and wise advice. Make sure you have an exit ramp that is actually a good exit ramp, and that you've thought that through ahead of time. Thank you very much. This has been a very interesting conversation, and I really appreciate the fact that you've both come forward to share your wisdom and knowledge and experience with the Jamaats. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Well, as I've said before, I do hope that you have found these vignettes interesting, and that they've given you some things to think about as you look at your own life and the circumstances that you are confronted with. Please know that we are available to serve you, and that the CAD system is there for you to reach out to if you have questions and concerns, and to make sure that you're not letting your disputes fester, because they have a way of growing into something bigger than when they first started out. Please know that from wherever you are, our prayers are there for your good health, your happiness, immense barakat in your lives. Khuda Hafiz. Yani Mother.